Welcome to the Southern Blueprint Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Swift. I am both excited and really nervous about this episode. I say nervous because I have already written, rewritten, recorded, and re-recorded this episode a few times now, and I just can't get it the way I want. I'm actually having a hard time with it and how I want to structure this episode. I was going to do this whole backstory on how NASCAR got started, but I think people already know all that. And I touched on it actually in episode 2, which is called Spirits of Rebellion. And we talked about moonshiners, bootleggers, and how kind of NASCAR got started. I talked about Jimmie Johnson. And so I want to pivot away from that because I don't think it's needed. And I'm also very nervous that any of you diehard NASCAR fans, you're going to listen to this episode and make fun of it or make fun of me. Well, I'm used to people making fun of me, but honestly, I wasn't sure where to begin. And when you listen to this episode, a major lawsuit will already be underway between 2311, which is a race team co-owned by Denny Hamlin, he's a race car driver, and Michael Jordan. Yes, that Michael Jordan. They co-own 2311, and they are suing NASCAR. And every day there has been wild news coming out about it, and all these emails and text messages have been made public from like the CEO of NASCAR, the president, and all of these things. And I'll get into a little bit of that later, but it's a wild time. And here's the kicker. I haven't watched NASCAR since like 2007, 2008. And I just started watching again with literally 4 races to go in this last season. That's right. I haven't followed NASCAR in almost 20 years. So I have marathoned every documentary that I could watch. I started listening to Denny Hamlin's podcast. I've started listening to Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s podcast. But it's a lot to take in. Maybe it's nostalgia as I get older. Maybe it's just the hope for the sport, but it seems I couldn't have picked a more batshit crazy of a time to get back into it, considering it just wrapped up its season to a kind of chaotic, controversial, and to many a very disappointing end. The playoff system is changing with lawsuits and, like I said, these private messages and emails being put on display for the world to see. Things are getting nasty, but maybe this is what needs to happen. Maybe NASCAR, for the first time in a long time, feels like it's starting to remember where it came from. Maybe it's the drivers, the owners, and fans pushing back and maybe forcing NASCAR to remember where it came from. So this episode is not just a story about cars going in circles. It's about a sport that grew out of Southern dirt, which is now facing its demons and is trying to find its identity again. I hope that you will bear with me here in this episode. So let's get into it. When I was young, NASCAR was thriving. At its core, it was still very much raw and very much still a Southern tradition. I grew up watching the sport in the early 80s and 90s when Earnhardt, Elliott, Wallace, Martin, Gordon, Labonte, and Waltrip, they weren't just drivers, they were legends. But somewhere along the way, the sport began to drift. Tracks disappeared. Rules changed, the point system grew confusing and convoluted, and the sport's blue-collar energy felt replaced by something sterile. And like I mentioned, I stopped watching around 2007, 2008, mainly because NASCAR no longer felt like home. But lately, I have found myself drawn back in. Now, again, I'm not going to go through the history of NASCAR and start in the 40s and make our way forward, but I am going to start in the 80s. I was born in 1979. And so as a kid, I started watching racing, in the early 80s. And by the early 80s, the sport had its first true superstar, and that is Dale Earnhardt. Now, I am originally from Kannapolis. I lived there until after the 8th grade, moved away to Albemarle, went to North Stanley High School, yada, yada. But the point is, I'm from Kannapolis, and there was just no way to not know who this man was, even if you knew nothing about racing. He was a guy that was from my town. He wasn't like polished like some of the others. He looked like a man who would rather fix a carburetor than do an interview. They called him the Intimidator. He had an amazing mustache. He had this look about him. He wore these sunglasses. He was the man. He raced like he was trying to prove something every single lap. And if you're a fan of NASCAR, I don't need to go into all the details about Dale Earnhardt. It's well documented that this guy was a badass in every sense of the word. But Earnhardt he was more than a driver, though. He was a symbol of grit and determination. And for a lot of people, including me, he was the symbol of NASCAR. And I kind of personally believe that the 90s were the golden era of NASCAR. Some may dispute that maybe in the early 2000s, but for me, it was the 90s. Because back then, NASCAR seemed to have like a rhythm. And more importantly, it had its roots still. You didn't need a schedule printed on your fridge or alerts on your phone to know where the next race was going to be or what time it was going to come on. The drivers had personalities. The tracks were hollowed ground, and the fans were loyal like family. Clear lines were drawn of who you like and who you don't like. Since I was a fan of Dale Earnhardt, there was absolutely no way and no reason for me to like Jeff Gordon. I don't make the rules. That was just the rules. I don't know why it was the rules. That's just the way it is. And there were so many great rivalries during that time. A lot of them included Dale Earnhardt. But it was awesome. But by the late 90s, I believe the suits smelled money. The crowds were bigger and the sponsors were pouring in. But that's when I think things started to drift. You should never underestimate the power of tradition. Southerners love tradition. We romanticize everything. I think that is where NASCAR sort of forgot what got them to where they were. Like I said, they started to move away from certain tracks, changed venues, and started like tinkering with things. So I go up to Boone, North Carolina all the time. I went to Appalachian State. I worked and lived in Boone for many years. I still have friends there. I go fly fishing up there almost every week. But I would always pass by North Wilkesboro Racetrack every time I went up through, 421. The last race there was, I think, in like 1996. And afterwards, it just sat there, slowly decaying over the years. And call me silly, but to me, it sort of mirrored the state of NASCAR, just over time, just slowly becoming a shell of its former self. The spirit to me, it was almost like back in the day, the spirit of NASCAR was once, if you love us, pull up a chair and join us, right? We're who we are. Today, it's more, please love us. We'll come to you. What do you need? Please love us. Please, please, please like us. We'll do whatever you need us to do? Oh, you like NFL? We could be like NFL. Just please love us. I wish I could give NASCAR some advice that you would tell a friend that's going on a date or that's in a new relationship, and just be yourself. That is why people liked you, being who you are. When you try to change yourself and pretend to be something you're not, that's when you get into trouble. NASCAR just needs to be itself. NASCAR was once like this. It was just a sport that people loved because it was what it was, warts and all. And I think that's the best advice I could give NASCAR is just people liked you for a specific reason, and you got popular for a specific reason. And it wasn't because you were trying to be anything other than what you were. It was never perfect. NASCAR's never been perfect. There's always been flaws and things to work on. But at the core, people were drawn to the sport by the drivers, by the narratives, by the cars, by the sound, by the tailgating, all of it. But when you start messing with it and trying to make it a different sport or take things from different sports, and it just doesn't work. But by the early 2000s, I was still watching NASCAR. But for me, it was more just for family. See, my brother was still a part of it. He worked in the pits behind the wall as a tire specialist. So he was on the pit crews for teams like Elliott Sadler, Joe Nemechek, Carl Edwards, and a few others along the way. But every pit stop, I would look to see if I could spot my brother. That was something that I kind of carried with pride. My brother's 10 years older than me, and I always looked up to him. And it gave me a reason to tune in every week, even when my driver wasn't winning. And, you know, my brother didn't always work for drivers that I would normally cheer for, but it was sort of fun doing so. It's kind of like, you know, I mentioned NFL. It's kind of like fantasy football. You start watching other teams and players that you're, I guess, attached to. So that was part of it. And I had my favorite drivers, of course, but it was kind of fun following my brother's team. But around this time, in the early-ish 2000s, NASCAR wasn't just a kind of like a Southern phenomenon. It was more of a national product. And in that transformation, it began to lose some of its soul. And I'm starting to learn here recently with things that are now coming out with some of these emails and text messages from people higher up in NASCAR. This shift may have come from certain individuals, but television money was definitely pouring in. Corporate sponsors swarmed. Races that once felt like backyard brawls now look like boardroom presentation. The raw, unpredictable energy of the 90s gave way to something a little more packaged, maybe a little more cautious. The sport was also expanding into new markets, like California, Chicago, Las Vegas, Kansas. It did so kind of at a cost. Beloved southern tracks like, I mentioned North Wilkesboro, and you had Rockingham and even Darlington's, Southern 500, things were changed or cut from the schedule altogether. So to long-time fans, it sort of felt like the sport was abandoning its roots for the sake of television ratings and shiny new markets. And NASCAR, it still had talented drivers. You still had Dale Sr., you had Dale Jr., Tony Stewart, who I really liked. You had Jimmie Johnson, you still had Jeff Gordon and Kevin Harvick that I really like. But the spirit was changing. And then you had Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s tragic death in 2001 that certainly stunned fans. I remember watching that race and just feeling gut punched after that wreck and then hearing the news. But the viewership was still strong even after that. But the I don't know, the commercialization and broadcast was changing. There was more advertising, new TV deals, more frequent commercial interruptions that drive me nuts. It made the viewing experience, to me at least, less attractive. Some long-time fans and cultural observers note that after Earnhardt's death, NASCAR's identity shifted. It was less grit, more polish, which I've kind of touched on a little bit already. There was more media training and fewer like rough around the edges characters that once defined the sport. And I've got to say, you know, kind of getting back into the sport, watching some of these documentaries and following some of the drivers, I couldn't agree more. Like it's just different. The drivers are different. They are very well trained, and just sometimes, and you still get it. And I've seen it a couple of times. You still get it that drivers will let loose a little bit, but it's not the same. But then, you know, kind of going back, you had all of this happen. You had Dale's death, which was absolutely tragic. But again, like I was saying, viewership was still great. But then came the chase for the cup. In 2004, NASCAR introduced a new playoff system meant to mimic the drama of other professional sports. Remember what I said about, you know, just being yourself? Anyway, they also were going back and forth, I feel like, letting drivers fight or not fight, race clean, or they were saying, now we're going to take the gloves off. And to me, it felt like the sport couldn't decide what it really wanted to be. And it was trying to like please everybody. It was very, very strange. It felt like every other year they were going back and forth like, oh, we're going to let the drivers go at each other. And then it turned into, no, we're not, you can't fight at all. You know, this is a gentleman's sport. It just, again, just reeked of a little bit of desperation and not exactly sure the direction that they wanted to go into. But 2005 was the peak of viewership. But then after that came the decline. The so-called car of tomorrow was introduced in 2007. It was safer, but everybody seemed to hate it. It just looked like, I don't know, the distinct personalities of each manufacturer and the connection between like the fans and their favorite brands, you know, Ford versus Chevy versus Dodge, et cetera. That was all, it wasn't the same. Everything looked the same. And again, everybody, the consensus was this car sucks. But again, you know, I know there were some safety concerns and that needed to change, especially after Dale Sr.'s death. And I think some very positive things came from that, of course. But the car of tomorrow just did not, from what I remember, set well with everyone. And now I'm going to say something around this time that's going to be mean. And again, I should stop. Everything that I have said in this show so far is my own personal opinion. There are probably other NASCAR experts that were probably listening to this saying like, none of this is true and accurate. Probably think this is so stupid, but this is just my own personal tale of how I feel about things. But I'm about to say something that's going to be mean and it's going to sound horrible. But again, this is how I felt back then, around 2007, 2008. It's going to sound horrible. There's no real logic for what I'm about to say. I just want to be brutally honest here. Jimmie Johnson also started winning all the time. He won 5 championships in a row, 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, and then 2010. And he was getting like 5 to 10 wins each of those seasons. Jimmie Johnson is a excellent driver. What he has done, winning 7 championships and tying Richard Petty and Dale Earnhardt for championships, is absolutely incredible. But to me, Jimmie was a little vanilla. And again, that's harsh and probably very stupid to say, but also I didn't pull for him. Illogically, I didn't like him. There was no reason for me to dislike him, but I didn't pull for him. It's much like I can't stand the Yankees and the Patriots and the Chiefs because they win all the time. And that's how I felt about Jimmie Johnson and his crew chief, Chad Knaus. It all kind of just started getting boring. It was very, I don't know how to really explain this. It was like, everything was like mathematical and robotic. And again, Jimmie's so buttoned up and, he's from California. Chad Knaus was from Illinois. I'm from the South, man. My favorite driver was Dale Earnhardt and then Dale Jr. They were for where I was from. Jimmie was basically the exact opposite and sort of, to me, and again, completely irrationally symbolized to me the more polished NASCAR, the prim and proper and straight-laced version of the sport that I didn't like. I realize this is idiotic. I get it. Jimmie is an amazing driver, like I said, and everyone says just how nice he is. So, but that's how I felt back then. And I guess this is more of a compliment than anything. He was just that damn good, right? He was dominant, but I hated it. It started being predictable. I didn't like it. And I was getting older and, getting into other things. But I just wanted to put that out there as kind of like, again, like why I stopped watching the sport, right? You had Dale Sr.'s death. You had the chase for the cup. They were getting away from certain tracks. You had the car of tomorrow, and then Jimmie Johnson starts winning, seemed like every damn race, and was winning all these championships and everything like that. So I just wanted to throw that in there. I know people are listening like, what the hell are you talking about? That makes no sense, but that's just how I felt. Also, too, you can't forget that there was an economic crash in 2008. Gas prices spiked. Tickets became harder to afford. The working class fans, I think, kind of pulled back a little bit. NASCAR's core fan base gets kind of devastated economically. And that's when attendance started to collapse in like 2008, 2010. Also, between 2004 and 2006, kind of going back a little bit, NASCAR underwent one of the biggest leadership and strategic shifts in its modern history. This is the period when Brian France took over as NASCAR chairman in 2003. You have Steve Phelps, who joined NASCAR in 2005. He was originally the vice president of corporate marketing. And I bring up his name for obvious reasons for people that have been following NASCAR and have seen recent news. He was promoted over time. In February 2006, he became chief marketing officer. He later rose to senior vice president, then executive vice president, and then chief operating officer in 2018. In October 1st, 2018, he became the president of NASCAR. And as of March 31st, 2025, he was named the sport's first ever commissioner. Which I guess they kind of restructured leadership around him. And we will definitely come back to Steve Phelps for sure. And again, I bring his name up for specific reasons. And if you are a NASCAR fan, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But I will come back to him in a little bit. But also, if we're kind of talking about me getting out of the sport and maybe where I see the decline, you had Dale Jr., who, was and is still wildly popular. And definitely after his father passed away, he was my favorite driver. But he left DEI in 2007, and he moved to Hendrick Motorsports. And that's where, Jimmie Johnson, Jeff Gordon, and people like that were. He joined the Yankees, basically. So I was like, man, that kind of sucks. And again, irrationally, just did not like Jimmie Johnson and Jeff Gordon for absolutely no reason. It's so funny to think about it now. And what's been great, though, what has been great, I want to stop here. What's been great about getting back into the sport, you start seeing some of these documentaries. There was definitely one on the Earnhardts, which was really, really great. But there was one about the rivalry between Dale and Jeff Gordon. Back in the day, I hated Jeff Gordon. Just, there was just no reason to hate him, but I did. But watching these documentaries, you start getting a different version of like real events. And as you get older, you're not as silly as when you were a kid and irrational. So it's been nice to kind of start to really appreciate Jeff Gordon and, really appreciate Jimmie Johnson and what they did. But going back to Dale Jr., him going to Hendrick Motorsports and then him retiring in 2017, that was a big blow to fans, in my opinion. It left a hole in many ways. And also, too, after he retired, Dale Jr. himself has, kind of publicly pointed out problems with NASCAR's format and presentation, arguing there's kind of like a lack of consistent storytelling and a build up of, like practice and qualifying. I feel like back in the day, and again, maybe I'm being dumb and irrational. I feel like when they were doing practice and qualifying, they were doing all these interviews and there was more hype around the race. And it doesn't really seem like it's as much. I don't know. Maybe I'm off on that. Maybe you guys can tell me that I'm off there. But there's really hasn't been any like narrative cohesion. But no doubt, there's been a lot of factors at play for the decline of NASCAR, and it hasn't really just been one thing. But there is an underlying rot that needs to be removed. And I'm starting to think there are a few names that a lot of fans would agree that probably need to go. So we have been pretty negative in this episode. There's no way. It's just me. I have been a little negative in this episode about NASCAR. So let me say something that NASCAR did do right. In 2020, it banned the Confederate flag. The sport that once prided itself on tradition found itself standing at a crossroads between heritage and humanity. The South has always had a complicated relationship with rebellion. But in 2020, in the midst of national unrest and social reckoning, NASCAR made a move that would have been unthinkable just a decade earlier. It banned the Confederate flag from all of its events and properties. For years, that flag had been a common sight at tracks, flown by fans, stitched on hats, waved from infield campers. And I recently rewatched Days of Thunder, and in the opening credits, the Confederate flag is shown prominently multiple times. Some see the flag as heritage, others as hate, but the truth is always, complicated. And NASCAR could no longer ignore what it represented to Americans. Bubba Wallace, who's an African-American driver, he was at the center of this whole defining moment in modern NASCAR. In the summer of 2020, as the country grappled with the murder of George Floyd, Bubba Wallace became the voice the sport didn't know it needed. He said in multiple interviews that he felt a responsibility as kind of the only full-time black driver in NASCAR's top level to use his platform. He kept saying the same thing over and over. He couldn't stay silent while every other major sport was responding. And he wanted NASCAR to finally confront racism that had lingered in pockets of the fan base and its history. His message, distilled down, was simple: humanity first. That message became visible to the world on June 7th, 2020 at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Bubba Wallace walked out during pre-race ceremonies wearing a black "I Can't Breathe" shirt. NASCAR responded with one of the most sweeping statements in its 70-plus year history. A massive "End Racism" stenciled, painted across the start-finish line. Drivers and crews standing behind their cars in unity. NASCAR officials delivering a message condemning racial injustice. And a moment of silence on broadcast live. Even the pace car carried a Black Lives Matter windshield banner. It was the first industry-wide, league-sanctioned anti-racism statement NASCAR had ever made. It was a big moment for the sport. But just days later, it would be back in the headlines. On June 21st, 2020, at Talladega Speedway, NASCAR and FBI launched an investigation after a garage door pull rope was tied like in a noose. And it was found in Bubba Wallace's garage stall. You can imagine the only African-American driver going into his garage stall and seeing a rope attached to his garage door that looked like a noose, especially in light of everything that was going on. There was an investigation and it found that, for whatever reason, that was tied long before, Bubba was in that stall, and it wasn't, made for him. It was just a horrible, I guess, coincidence. But regardless, everybody had come together, and NASCAR was doing something right. All of the drivers were behind it. Dale Earnhardt Jr. actually had said something back in like 2015 when he was interviewed. He said that the Confederate flag had no place in NASCAR. It should belong in like the history books or something like that. But this needed to happen. Again, we've talked about tradition and history. Sometimes things do need to be changed for the sake of people. So to me, this was a major step. And I remember it was one of those things, as I was not watching it anymore, I did get wind of it and watched the news and, was keeping track of that stuff. And I remember being very impressed by it because there is this like stigmatism, and I feel like I could say this being a Southern guy. And I mean, my account is called The Southern Blueprint. You are listening to the Southern Blueprint podcast. But I do think there is this like stigmatism of like all Southern people are rednecks and we all love the Confederate flag and everything like that. So it was nice that the sport that kind of, to me, still signified the South was doing away with it. And it should have done so a long time ago, but at least they were doing something now. And I appreciate Bubba, and I also appreciate all the car owners. Richard Petty was Bubba's Wallace's car owner at the time. And, Richard Petty is a legend. And he really had Bubba's back and was out front and center. And I think if you probably don't know any better and you think of Richard Petty and old school Southern racing, you probably don't think this man. I mean, if you look at him, he has sunglasses on and a cowboy hat at all times. I think he was probably born that way. But you wouldn't think that he would be on the side of this. So it was very refreshing to see. And I think it sent a strong signal. And it's one of the things I'm actually very proud of the sport. And it's probably one of the things now that I'm kind of like looking back on it, it's like one of the things that kind of got my attention again, if that makes sense. In recent years, there's been some other positive changes and nods actually to heritage. There was the return of North Wilkesboro. Like I said, once left to rot, it's been reborn. And honestly, it's been great driving up 421 and seeing the new banners and that red painted bridge that goes over the highway. It's a beautiful sight. And, I talked about the banning of the Confederate flag kind of piquing my interest. Well, this is definitely something else that really caught my attention. And maybe I was a little naive in thinking like, hey, maybe NASCAR is really starting to like figure this back out. And I say that and then you have this like lawsuit and all these text messages and emails coming out. I'm like, maybe we still got a ways to go. But it's been awesome to see. And also too, Rockingham is coming back, and Rockingham is a race that I got to go to in person and got to sit on the pit box. Like I said, my brother was working for one of the teams. He was actually working with Casey Atwood at the time, and I believe, is it Todd Parrott was the crew chief? There's a hilarious story there. But anyway, at that race, my brother always thinks that I'm 10 years old. He's 10 years older than me, but no matter how old I am, he still thinks I'm 10 years old. But I was in my 20s during this race, and I got to sit on the pit box, and he puts the headset on me. He's like, do not under any circumstances talk on the radio. Do not push the button. Do not talk on the radio. And I'm like, dude, why would you think that I would do that? But it was really cool. I got to sit there and listen to the whole race, and it was actually kind of funny and entertaining because the crew chief got mad during the race and basically left the pit box with a couple of laps to go because he was so mad at Casey Atwood. Anyway, that's a whole other story. But it's cool that NASCAR is going back to that track too. So there's been some positive things, and now there's like all these new drivers too, like that I'm learning. And like Chase Elliott, it's Bill Elliott's son. And he's carrying that legacy. You got Ross Chastain, who's like a watermelon farmer from Florida. You've got Denny Hamlin, who's like the bad guy. You got Kyle Larson, who is very much like Jimmie Johnson and Jeff Gordon. You've got Ryan Blaney. You got Christopher Bell. You have all of these kind of new drivers and everything like that. But I definitely want to see some personality. Not a vanilla, button-down, milquetoast, sterile corporate driver that's afraid to say things. And I'm hoping NASCAR will foster expression on and off the track. But I was kind of getting away from my original point that there's some really positive things that are going on. We do have some really great race car drivers. There's a younger, more diverse audience showing up, I think, now. The sport that kind of once felt stuck in his ways in a lot of ways is starting to open up its doors a lot more. There's iRacing, which I think has been huge. I have been playing the new NASCAR 25 game, and honestly, it's been a great way for me to learn all the series again, all the drivers and everything like that. But for me, coming back to NASCAR has been this fun mix of nostalgia and rediscovery. And like I said, I have picked a hell of a time to come back to the sport. It's been crazy. I watched those last 4 races of the season, and it was brutal on all fronts. Like I said, the current playoff system is changing. You've got the lawsuit going on. You had Denny Hamlin that is in this lawsuit, but also he's was chasing this elusive championship. And then in the very last race, he gets the short end of the stick, and it is truly it was heartbreaking. And Denny's not someone that I think that I would be necessarily a fan of, but I think if you watch any sporting event and you follow any narrative, and I was, like I said, I caught up on all the documentaries and found all this content and was really crunching like I was about to take an exam, getting all of this information. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a lot of people that just secretly, at least, wasn't cheering for Denny to win a championship. It was truly brutal to watch, and it's just crazy that, again, I'm coming back into the sport when they're doing away with this idiotic playoff format that I think has plagued the sport. And it's crazy. As I'm listening to fans and starting to follow certain people on social media, like pundits, journalists, personalities, listening to the drivers, no one likes this playoff system, but yet it just continued. And it's just insane that the higher ups just have continued with this. I promised I would come back to Steve Phelps. I mentioned earlier, he's the, president of NASCAR, right? He's over NASCAR. But it's come to light through emails and text messages that he's been texting people like an angry, petulant child. It came out that he called car owner Richard Childress, who used to be the car owner of Dale Earnhardt. He has, Childress Vineyards. You probably know who Richard Childress is. Anyway, but he called him a redneck, a dinosaur, a malcontent, and that he should be taken out back and flogged. Now, Steve did reach out to Richard and tell him hey, these text messages are going to come out, and just know that when I was saying this, I was just angry at the time, which I think is just such a chicken shit bullshit thing to say. I'm sorry. Again, I don't know Steve, but it just seems like, oh, you got caught talking shit. And that's kind of, I don't know. But this whole exchange pretty much, to me, sums up the state of affairs. To me, professionalism matters. Leadership matters. Even if you're talking to someone in a text message, because who he was texting was also someone higher up in NASCAR. So to me, this tells me everything that I need to know. And again, kind of makes me think, and going back, okay, viewership started tanking in after 2025. There is kind of a little correlation, if not a direct correlation, between this man and a couple other people involved in NASCAR and the decline. I think for me, and this happens in other sports too. I'm a big soccer fan. You may or may not know, I have a soccer podcast too, where I talk about Charlotte FC. And I think MLS also goes through this same thing but actually NASCAR and MLS are kind of very similar. They have identity problems. They have an attendance, viewership issue that they think that they need to correct. And every single year they're doing something different and drastic and crazy. But also, more importantly too, I think there are too many people in MLS and NASCAR that never played the sport, never did anything, that come from different backgrounds, that think that they are extremely smart and that they did a certain thing over here and then now they could do it here. They tend to not listen to fans. They tend to, in NASCAR's case, not seem to listen to the drivers because, again, they think that they know better. And to me, this whole text message exchange really rubs me the wrong way. And I think maybe a good old-fashioned shakeup is what is needed, a purging. So there's a lot of people, me reading through social media, that don't like this lawsuit between 2311 and NASCAR. They think it's going to open up a can of worms, and it kind of has already. And I'm sure it will be even more. But at the same time, maybe, just maybe, this is kind of what is needed, and expose some of the bullshit that's been going on. But yeah, like I said, when this comes out, the lawsuit's already been going to be going on, and I will do some updates. I'm not going to do it in a podcast form. Follow me on social media. I'm going to do some commentaries, mostly on Mondays. I'll usually do it. And I'm about to go on vacation. When I come back, I'll start doing some more commentary around the actual lawsuit itself. But yeah, wild times to be coming back, man. I know I'm sitting here, taking digs at NASCAR and people that run it and everything like that. But I gotta say, it's actually very damn exciting to be back and kind of starting this all over again. Like it's kind of like coming to the sport anew. Like I haven't watched in so long. I don't even have a favorite driver right now. Like I said, in Kannapolis, back in the day when you went to first grade, they just gave you a Dale Senior shirt and a Sundrop and sent you on your way. I mean, my favorite driver was pretty set from day one. And then, his son Dale Jr. comes along, who I very much like, and I've really been loving his podcast. He's popular for a reason, and he's awesome for a reason. And so, like, when he left, I mean, who do I like now? And so I have to figure out who I'm going to pull for. There's Ryan Blaney. I mean, he has a beard and he drinks bourbon. I don't know, maybe him. There's the local kid, Charlotte kid, William Byron. I don't know. Then you got Chase Elliott. He's a fan favorite. I always liked Bill Elliott. You've got Denny Hamlin, who's kind of like the bad guy in a way. Still trying to get that championship. And you've got a lot of young drivers coming up. I don't know. But coming back to NASCAR right now feels a little like walking into your hometown bar after being gone for a decade. The place looks different. The jukebox got replaced. Everybody painted the walls, and there's a new guy running the register. But the bones, the things that actually matter, are still there. You just have to look for them again. And honestly, it's kind of exciting. Because even with the chaos, the lawsuits, the executive drama, the emails, the playoff confusion, there's something, I think, happening underneath all this noise. You can feel the sport straining, trying, fighting to figure itself out again, and trying to remember who it's supposed to be. And I think maybe that's why I'm a little drawn back in. The sport's not perfect. It never has been, though. It's messy, loud. It's tension and noise and heart. It's families in the stands. It's beer coolers at the tailgates. It's Southern roots and American stubbornness, and the idea that anybody with the right mix of courage and foolishness could strap into a car and outrun the world. And maybe, just maybe, we're inching back toward that version of NASCAR. You see it with North Wilkesboro coming back from the dead. You see it with Rockingham. You see folks like Dale Jr. and Kenny Wallace, who I've been following, who's been great. And you got Mark Martin still being the conscience of the sport and being the voice of the drivers and fans. You see it in the way fans show up, even when they're frustrated, because deep down we all want this thing to be great again. I think it just needs to be itself, like I said before: loud, flawed, fast, proud, and built on the kind of stories that outlive the people who lived them. And if the folks running the place can't understand that, then maybe this chaos is exactly what's needed to shake these ass clowns loose. Either way, I am here for it. I am watching again. I'm pulling for this whole crazy mess to come together again. And maybe in a few months, I'll even settle on a new guy to cheer for. If you're listening to this episode and follow me on social media, tell me who you think I should cheer for. That would fit perfectly with who I am. I'm kind of interested to hear what you guys have to say, but it's kind of cool to pick or repick, I guess, a favorite driver. But for now, I'm just glad that I'm back. Thanks for hanging out with me. I know this is not a traditional episode that I do. I usually do more of, storytelling. This one was a lot more personal, and I just wanted to have a conversation with you guys. And I'm very much curious in how you feel about things, and I also want to hear if I'm way off base, especially you. Die-hard NASCAR fans. How off base am I with all this stuff? Again, a lot of this is not rooted in fact. It's just very much a personal opinion. But thank you so much for indulging me. Like I said, I had a hard time with this episode. I had written it, and it was probably going to be like a 4-hour freaking episode. I was going to do this whole history and everything like that. But I just felt like I couldn't get it right and couldn't get my point across. And so just, like I said, this is more of just a conversation. But if you enjoyed this one, do me a favor, hit that follow button, leave a rating, leave a review, send it to other folks that might like this. It really does help more than you know, and it keeps this whole thing moving forward. And if you want more of what we're building here, the deep dives, the history, the culture, the community, head over to my Patreon. It's called The Hidden Pine Lodge. It's only $4 a month, and you get bonus posts. You get monthly bourbon chats, behind the scenes stuff, and with that, you get access to our community Discord. It's a good time over there. We're talking about all types of stuff. We got hiking, camping, fly fishing, bourbon. And also, too, that's where you'll get access to our book club. And funny enough, this past month, our book club just finished reading Southern Stock by Gina Elliott. It's a fantastic story about Stick Elliott. It's rooted in NASCAR history and family legacy. And it's funny because the book's timing is perfect for me kind of getting back into the fandom, because this book is very much rooted in one thing. It's just a racer. At the bare bones, racing is racing, a racer is a racer. All of the stuff is just noise. But with the book club, we pick a book every month. We'll have good conversations in our Discord about it. And at the end of the month, we all kind of get together and do a virtual hangout and talk about the book, drink, bourbon or whatever you want to drink, and just have a good time. So again, thank you so much for listening. If you want to support the show, go do that over on Patreon, The Hidden Pine Lodge. But thank you for being a part of this whole thing that I'm trying to build. And a big thank you to my producer, Corey Insco. This has been the Southern Blueprint, and we'll see you next time.